everyone, this is Mr. Nobody bringing you a sort of unusual episode of Making Nobody Happy. This is a subject that I don't always like to talk about because to me it gets a little too political and personal. What I do want to talk about is Anglicanism, and it's partly because a story I saw in the news about some fracturing of the Anglican Church in Australia, and of course there have been a lot of other fracturings and rearranging of the Anglican Church across the entire world over the last couple of decades. And, you know, if you're not Anglican, you might not really be aware of that, but it's something that's really been happening. And the whole structure of the church is changing a lot. And even where the church is and where it is located, who is actually Anglican these days, has really changed a lot, considering it's the Anglican Church. It's the Church of the Angles, the English. More and more that's becoming something that's not really entirely true, which is a very funny thing. So you're ending up with these sort of two different ways of looking at the Anglican Church. But I was also emailing with someone recently who comes from a totally different background from me. It's someone who lives in, I think it was Scotland, and so, you know, he had a lot of thoughts, and he's much more invested in it, you know, in a very deep way than I am. To me, it's just, oh yeah, the Anglican Church, whatever. I mean, the Anglican Church means something very different, of course, to people who are in it, and it means something very different to people in England. That is technically their state church, which is a very unusual thing for me as an American to even think about. But I did want to talk about it. Like I said, without getting, I'm not looking to take a side or to blame anything on anyone or criticize, because I just don't want to get involved in any of that. But I have noticed that there is this ongoing fracturing of Anglicanism, and apart from what people would say is, well, what are the issues causing it? For me, that's a whole other thing. I feel like what I was thinking about after talking to a couple different people about it is it seems clear to me that there's actually something in the structure of Anglicanism itself that creates these possibilities for these wedge issues. So the big division that I see among Anglicanism is that there's this very large division between different countries, because it is a church that is all across the world. There is a division because of the degree to which those churches are political, connected to the state, an institution of the state and of the culture. So in England, the Anglican Church has a very different history and position in society, institutionally, than the Anglican Church does in, say, Nigeria, where there are a lot of Anglicans. For a long time, the historical and cultural association, you know, that it was the Church of England, it really protected and cultivated the church, particularly within England. But I think there's also something about that connection specifically to England and to the English culture that also leaves the Anglican Church with this fundamental underlying vulnerability. So in my opinion, Anglicanism sowed the seeds for its split the first time it became a purely religious institution in countries that were neither English politically, nor culturally, nor ethnically. So they created an underlying difference in the relationship of the church to its members and to the wider society and culture. The non-English churches are, in a way, more religious. They're less secular, not just in practice, but in structure. They are not artifacts of the English culture that is existing there. They are not artifacts of the English government, because those aren't English people, and there is no English government there. So that makes the Anglican Church in those countries a fundamentally different and more unusual and independent entity. So, as long as the underlying cultures for those countries, like, say, England, Nigeria, Australia, whatever, so long as those cultures were in relative agreement and in step, or at least following each other, following the sort of leadership of the English culture, the churches in those countries held together in communion. But as the cultures and the countries and the governments moved in different directions, those underlying structural differences pulled the parts of the church in different directions. So in more English and institutionally secular countries like the UK and Canada and Australia, the faith moves with the culture and the politics. Whereas in these other countries, like in Africa, they don't share those politics, they don't share that culture, so the church doesn't feel any need to move with the English political or cultural movement. So long term, that really raises the question of what exactly is the basis of the Anglican Church as a distinct religious entity? Does it have a political basis? Is there a scriptural basis? Is it a cultural basis? What is the basis of the Anglican Church? In England, the foundations of the church seem to be far more political and cultural and traditional, as in based in tradition, on Englishness, on English traditions within that culture of here's the things we do, we go to evensong, the sort of love that the English have of performing the old things of the past. They love their traditions. But in other countries, the basis for the church is completely different. It's not built on that sense of tradition. It lacks the historical and cultural and traditional grounding. And instead, it's grounded more on this scriptural basis, on this evangelistic basis. What is the message? What is this thing that has been created here? It's more specifically religious and less cultural and traditional. And the funny thing is that basis in these other countries has actually proved to be more fruitful and also more durable than the traditional political and cultural Anglicanism of the English countries, where Anglicanism is rapidly shrinking and becoming a minority within the faith community. Whereas in other countries that lack the anglicized part of Anglicanism, it has grown, it has thrived, it has been producing more and more leaders. There's a genuine possibility that the next time the Anglican Church put someone in charge when their current leader retires, there's a genuine chance you're going to end up with someone from Africa because England inadvertently created something that England can't really hang on to anymore, and because of its Englishness is actually becoming a sort of, shrunken traditional artifact within their own culture. It's not as much of a vibrant, expanding thing. And those parts of it that have stayed more vibrant tend to be the parts of it that are actually more similar to the African Anglican churches. So it's a very strange thing that's happening. But as I said, there's this question of, what is the Anglican Church? Is it a state church? Is it a church of a culture? If it is a church of a culture, then of course it moves with the culture. It's going to reflect the culture that it's a part of. Whereas in these other countries, it's a completely different thing. But that means that those two different things, although they call themselves Anglicanism, have completely different basis for what they are and what they have to say and what they are doing and what they have to share and where they're coming from and where they're going. The forces that control them are actually going to be completely different. And so at some point, how do these two keep being the same thing? So I think that is a question that is going to have to be addressed. Partly it's already being wrestled over. No one likes to see Anglicanism broken up, but it's something you're seeing more and more happening, and internal divisions between the different areas. As I said, in part because the English Anglican Church has a very different basis for what it is. And the rest of the Anglican Church is quite likely to look at it and just say, well, that's just you. That's just Englishness. And we're not here to practice a religion of Englishness. Even if at one point that may have seemed attractive. They've all grown up. They've sort of become the big ones. They've become the big churches. They've become the big leaders of Anglicanism in the world. These people in other countries. And so they're very likely to look at it and say, I know we're part of the Anglican Church, but we're not here to worship Englishness. Anyway, that's all for today. We'll see you next time.